Hey everyone, Tyler Harms with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources here. I'm here with our state wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Rachel Rudin. Today we are with Tim and Joel, and we're going to show you how to collect a tissue sample for chronic wasting disease testing so that you can both help with our surveillance goals and also help make informed consumption decisions. So we have a deer here on the back of our tailgate. This is actually a roadkill deer that we've collected for the purpose of the video today, but we're going to walk through this process as if this was a deer that was harvested by you in the field, and then we can show you kind of what this looks like. So again, if this deer were harvested in the field, likely be field dressed at this point, we would have a tag on the animal, and then the next step would be to pull this tissue sample for chronic wasting disease testing. So we're going to walk you through that now.
So first you need to know what equipment to have. So basically you just need a fillet knife, some sort of sharp knife to collect your sample with, and then we have our official whirl packs that we're going to put each lymph node into, but you can just use a Ziploc baggie, something like that would be perfectly fine. And we'll talk about the paperwork on the tail end of this video.
Okay, so first things first, what you want to do is you have your deer laying down here. We're going to make a cut into the neck right about here, and your landmark is essentially you just kind of feel for the bottom of the jaw, kind of where that hinge is, basically right here in the neck. And if you're feeling along here, you can feel the solid jaw go all the way back just below the ears. You can feel where that hinge is. That's essentially where we're going to make our cut. So we're going to cut right through here, cutting right up through the ears, and we'll show you how deep to make the cut so that you can actually access the tissues that we're sampling. So what we're pulling is what are called the retropharyngeal lymph nodes, which are the lymph nodes that are basically the lymph nodes that you feel swell up when you might be feeling a little under the weather yourself, kind of right under the jaw, right in your neck here. So those are the lymph nodes that we're looking for. I'll make the cut. Dr. Rudin is going to kind of step us through some landmarks that we're looking for as we're doing that. Okay, so again, feeling for the bottom of the jaw there. Make one straight cut up towards the ears, just like that. And you want to make sure you cut all the way through the trachea so that you can get access to the tissues. So you can see as we're cutting here, we're getting it so that we can peel that head back and get access to the tissues in there.
And so this deer is a little messier because it was a roadkill. It definitely had some fractures to the head. So in a clean hunter harvest, these tissues would be, a lot more distinct and defined, and they'd probably be a lot less bloody. So first we're going to point out our epiglottis. So that is the tissue that closes when you swallow, so that you don't get food going down into your lungs. So this tissue right here, this little flap, it kind of will point out at you. That is our epiglottis, and that tells us that we're right at that level of the larynx, which is, again, kind of right where you swallow. The tissues that we want to find, the retropharyngeal lymph nodes, are going to be on either side, and you kind of have to orient a little bit, but they're going to be on either side of this larynx or laryngeal structure. So next, we're just going to kind of, I guess I'll point out maybe a couple other tissues now that I'm seeing them. So there's kind of a fluffy tissue right over here, if you can kind of zoom in on that. A lot of people get confused that this is the lymphoid tissue or the retropharyngeal lymph node. That's actually the salivary gland, and it kind of looks like a fluffy kind of cloud-like structure. When the animal's cold, so right now we're working on it's like a 65-degree day here. This animal didn't get too cold overnight, but if you're working with the animal in the dead of winter, a lot of these tissues will kind of congeal down and they'll get a lot harder and firmer, and that can kind of get a feeling of multiple little like balls, almost like each one of those little clouds will firm up, and it can be a little confusing for figuring out the different textures that we're looking for. So all this right here is that salivary gland. But if we take a look around and kind of tease through some of this tissue, other side. And all of this, you know, there's not a great way, you know, sometimes it's really obvious, sometimes it's going to take a little bit of orientation. So even for us, and we're kind of the experts here, right? So, and you'll see that there's other smaller lymph nodes. So, you know, I have a lymph node right here that's pretty small. I would expect in a buck this size for it to be bigger, but, you know, once we kind of probe around a little bit, it might be that that's actually our lymph node. There's another lymph node here. This is looking closer to the size I would expect. And so things may have gotten repositioned with the roadkill. Here's a little bit more of that fluffy salivary gland tissue.
So why don't we, Rachel, what I might do really quick is
Yeah.
I'll take one of these lymph nodes out here. So really quickly here, everybody, you can kind of tell the difference what we're looking for. So like as Dr. Rudin said, the salivary gland tissue, which is what I have right here in my hand, is often confused for the retropharyngeal lymph node, and you can see why. They look pretty similar in overall appearance. But what I'm going to try to describe here, what you're not getting in the video, is actually the feel of the two tissues. So as Dr. Rudin mentioned, is when it's colder, this salivary gland tissue is going to be much more rigid. It's going to feel a lot more solid than it actually is. But oftentimes, if you kind of pinch it between your fingers, you'll notice that it flattens out and it will almost kind of break apart as you pinch it between your fingers. If you take this lymph node that I have here, you'll notice that it's a little bit more rigid or robust in structure. If you squeeze it, it's not going to break apart. It actually feels just a lot thicker. Almost, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a kind of a solid ball-like structure, and so you can see the differences between those two tissues, and so that kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking for when we're looking for the tissues that we're sampling. So this is one of the lymph nodes here. We sample two lymph nodes, so one on either side of the neck, as Dr. Rudin mentioned. Essentially, we really only need one of the lymph nodes for sampling, but we always like to have a backup. You never know what might happen at the lab. Sometimes they're not able to get enough tissue out of one lymph node for the testing process, and so it's nice to have that backup just in case. And so when we're sampling for our surveillance program, we call those the A's and the B's, basically. The A's go to the lab, the B's hang back with us in case something happens, and we have that extra because we want to make sure we get those test results back from that animal.
I'll just point out another structure here. So again, this is a little sloppier than what we'd normally be dealing with a hunter harvest. But you can see right here, there's kind of these two dark balls. People will call them blueberries. There's also some on this tissue right here. Might be hard to appreciate, but this is another lymph node, and it has a little blueberry right in that same location. So that's a really good indicator that you're in the right spot, that you have a lymph node, first of all, and that you're in the the right lymph node, second of all. So you know, it looks like this deer might just have kind of small lymph nodes that got kind of mixed up when it got hit. But this is the exact tissue that we're looking for. So that medial retropharyngeal lymph node has those little blueberries. They're not always visible. If you're wondering what I mean by a blueberry, it's actually called a hemal node, also sometimes called an accessory spleen. It's just another filtering organ, part of that lymphoid system that all animals have. So it's maybe not as impressive in this deer, just given the circumstances, but these would be the samples that we're looking for. So that one that Tyler was showing, and then this little lymph node here. The other thing you can do, if you're curious about, you know, especially when they're colder and you might not be sure, and you know things have congealed, you can actually cut into them. You can cut in half. So we can go ahead and do that with this one. So we're just going to cut it right in half. And if you look inside, a lot of times you'll see it'll have like a pinkish core right in the center and then kind of become a tan white on the outside. This one's pretty uniform. Occasionally you'll even see like pus or a sign of infection. That's nothing to worry about. That doesn't mean that there's chronic wasting disease or anything like that. It just means that it probably had a respiratory infection at the time of harvest. So that kind of real uniform, just kind of smooth surface, that's what you're looking for to confirm that you have a lymph node. If we were to do this on the salivary gland, it would just kind of look like fat kind of tissue, and it would just be that same kind of fluffiness throughout, but you wouldn't have that same kind of smooth, kind of liquid surface that we have on cut section here.
So Dr. Rudin mentioned briefly about size of the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. There's really no pattern necessarily, so some folks might think, well, you know, maybe the lymph nodes are a little bit bigger in a buck or a little bit smaller in the doe, and that's generally true, but not always. And I think this animal is a really good example of, you know, obviously we have an adult buck here that has two fairly small size lymph nodes, and so size isn't always a great reference. Again, it's just you're feeling around for that solid ball of a tissue in there. Oftentimes what I've seen in my experience is that adult bucks like this will have one lymph node that's very large and another lymph node that's very small. There might be a biological or medical reason for that I'm not aware of, but does tend to be smaller, but not always. Sometimes you'll get a doe that has fairly large lymph nodes as well. So size isn't a great reference. Again, you're just kind of feeling around and looking for that solid tissue in there.
Yeah, I would also say color. Color can really vary. Sometimes they'll be a deep purple, sometimes they'll be pretty white like that, or a light tan like that one. And when you get, hopefully in our next head that we're going to sample from, we'll see there's almost a translucent appearance to it. It almost looks like a water ball in there, you know, amongst the tissue. So harder to appreciate when there's more blood and that kind of thing, kind of discoloring the area, but it's that feel, and then also you can kind of see it within its fascia, or the tissue that's kind of holding everything in place, and then you can really target where you want to grab that sample. So next up, we're just going to put these in these bags. So we have one bag for each, the A lymph node and the B lymph node, like Tyler mentioned, and yeah, we'll move on to our next deer head.
Okay, so Dr. Rudin's now removed both of the lymph nodes, so what we're going to do next is place them in the bags. So when you're doing this on your harvested deer, first what we do is we put one lymph node in each of two separate bags. So we're keeping those two lymph nodes separate. And then for your reference, and actually for reference for the sampling process or the testing process, what we often ask hunters to do is write the registration number on the bag, and that again is the 9-digit number on your deer tag. And the nice thing about that number is that it's unique to this individual deer. So if you were to harvest multiple deer, then you could reference that number if you were wanting to look up the test results for this individual deer. So we have a couple different ways that we allow samples to be submitted. The first of which is that you can submit samples through our regular surveillance program. That's a surveillance program that we organize every year, and it's a way that we can track the spread of the disease in the population, essentially for our management purposes. But we also recognize that testing deer for chronic wasting disease is also important to a number of our hunters, and so there is an avenue through the Iowa State University Veterinary Diagnostic Lab where hunters can submit samples on their own behalf. There is a fee of $25 associated with that sample, but you can contact us. We'll help you pull that sample. We'll ship the sample in. You go online, pay the fee, and then you can get those results back. The other nice thing about using that registration number is that we have a portal on our website that allows you to look up your test results and using that registration number or using your DNR ID number. And so again, referencing that unique animal is important if you're wanting to look those results up after the fact.
So does the sample need to be frozen, or do I need to ship it with ice or dry ice or anything like that?
So once the sample is collected, you can put it in your freezer for temporary storage, and then once you once you ship it, if you want to ship it yourself, we do ship all of our samples with ice packs. And I would recommend, again, we're very willing to ship samples for hunters, and so if you contact your local DNR office, we'd be happy to ship it with our samples as well. Anything to add to that?
I guess I would just say, in addition to, if you're in an area that has already reached its quota, another use of that hunter submission pathway is if you want to test deer, demographic classes like a fawn, that is not going to tell us exactly what we need for our surveillance objectives. It's a lower risk age class, but it doesn't mean that it can't also have CWD and test positive. So that's a really good pathway for, if you're beyond quota or you have something, that you're just testing every animal you're consuming, that's where we'd send you.
Thanks for listening or watching our show. We have some exciting topics and guests coming up.
We ask that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
We look forward to hearing your suggestions for topics,
Questions and comments. This is Two Dumbasses signing off. Until next time,
be safe,
have fun, and get outdoors.